Sol Kavonik, welcome to the program.
It's good to be with you.
What are the main concerns for the gas and energy markets you have about the buildup of Russian troops on the Ukraine border?
Now, in particular, there are concerns that Russia could restrict gas supply into Europe. And there are a number of scenarios the way this can play out. Just to be clear, there are some benign scenarios, both in terms of whether there's actually a conflict that takes place, but even if there was a conflict in terms of gas flows. But in some of the more extreme scenarios, for example, were Russia to severely curtail its gas throughput into Europe, we're talking about over a third of European gas supply could be shut off suddenly. And that could have massive ramifications, both economically and politically, and for pricing for gas at a global level.
Can you take us through the various scenarios and how severe those price moves might be?
Well, one of the key things to look for here is flows through Ukraine, and the alternative routes for gas should flows through Ukraine be disrupted due to a conflict. Now, one of those main alternative flows is through the new Nord Stream 2 pipeline, which is still yet to go through its final approvals. And we've heard from President Biden and others that they'll be looking to essentially stop that pipeline proceeding in the event that the situation were to escalate further. The problem with that scenario is if we don't get enough gas going through the Ukraine pipeline and the Nord Stream 2 pipeline is also therefore not able to come online, that could really restrict some of the options to get gas into Europe. Now, there are still some other pipelines which do get gas into that, and there is obviously some LNG terminals. So that's a scenario which would probably cause significant increases in prices and potentially some demand curtailment and blowdown of storage in Europe. But that is not necessarily going to extend to the most extreme scenario. The most extreme scenario would be if Russia was to actually shut off gas through nearly all avenues into Europe. In that world, we're looking at a situation where we could see mass scale demand destruction through Europe, which could go beyond industry into people being able to heat their homes, keep their lights on. And in that scenario, you could see potential breakdown of a free flowing gas market within Europe as gas nationalism rises.
So, that extreme scenario could not only affect the gas market, but erode the economic relationships countries have with each other.
The event where it has a sudden drastic curtailment, that can become a political problem, and it could threaten the overall open European market in that sense. So yes, the ramifications are not just some individual kind of gas-intensive manufacturing like fertilizers, which have already been decimated in Europe over the last few months due to high prices, but extend well beyond that to the hip pocket and livelihoods of average people in the population.
Oil and gas prices are already at elevated levels. How high could they go?
Again, highlighting this is the more severe scenario, which is still a low probability scenario. But in that scenario, it's very hard to say how high prices could go, other than say, right now, we're already at record prices, but I wouldn't be surprised if we saw LNG exceed $100 or even $200 an MMBTU, which is still several multiples on top of the already record prices we're seeing right now. That said, if we just take a step back and assume some of the more moderate scenarios, then we're likely to not see pricing reach that levels. There you can see management of some of the gas supply. For example, slight boost of LNG imports, boost of gas supply through other routes, blowdown of gas inventories, which would do long-term structural damage to their storage. But there could be an arsenal of mitigation measures which together, along with modest demand destruction, could get Europe through.
The Australian government recently publicly offered to help fill any gas supply gap in Europe. Is it feasible to get Australian gas into Europe? And secondly, if so, what implications would there be for the local market if we started selling more gas offshore?
Well, look, I think it's important to see it more as a comforting geopolitical signal to allies rather than actually a sign that there's going to be a direct policy measure on this front. Because just to be absolutely clear, we are quite convinced that Australia's LNG exports will do precisely nothing different and will not be able to provide any additional assistance other than they would otherwise do. And what I mean by that is Australia's LNG production is already at the absolute maximum it can be. I mean, prices are so high, it's incentivizing maximum production. And to the extent that there's a disruption in Europe, You could see some volumes go to Europe versus Asia, but Australia's going to sell to whoever pays the highest price, which again comes back to that debate we've had about how high will that price have to be to drag a cargo into Europe versus Japan to keep the lights on. The impact for domestic market here, we could see upward pressure, as I mentioned, but to be clear, we're not going to see massive upward pressure. Most of the domestic market is well supplied under contracts. The government has a strong kind of level of pressure and scrutiny over that. Most of the exporters on the East Coast are aware of that and will keep the East Coast market supplied through this.
Saul Kavonik, thank you for your time.
Thank you.